Okay, so the next form that needs to be completed is the Excel copy of the cost certification form. So that form is also located on the cost certification form and submittable. It is the first upload field here, and there is a link here for the form to access that directly. So when you click that, that's going to pull open a window, and within that window, there's going to be an Excel file titled Cost Certification Form 2021. So go ahead and click that open. And then within that, you'll see the first thing you're going to want to click here is this Enable Content button. And then there's a second one followed right after that. And so that allows the macros on this form to work, which you'll see in just a moment. That's going to allow you to get some NPA specific columns there. So it's pretty handy for that. And then on the first tab here, you can see there's some instructions kind of for completing this. You can see some of the required items that need to be included on the form, as well as some of those more specific items if there's salary information that needs to be reported or the con form needs completed. And then down beneath that, there's general information on completing the form. So kind of step by step there. It identifies the cell and column of specific ones there too. So jumping to the next tab, this kind of points out the different qualified and non-qualified expenses, so QREs and non-QREs. And it kind of, this list isn't all-encompassing, so it doesn't include every single thing that might either be allowed or disallowed, but it does act as kind of a basis for what you can kind of expect from this program for what's, QRE or not. And if there are, any, kind of questions or anything that comes about from this, definitely feel free to reach out to us and ask, and we'll definitely get you squared away on whether it's qualified or not for any, any expense. So that's there for, additional reference for using when filling this form out. So we'll jump over next to the EXP form tab. And you can see there's an EXP form and con form tab on this Excel spreadsheet. So basically, the EXP form is essentially for applicant-related expenses, and the con form is for specific expenses related to a related party general contractor or a subcontractor, equipment lessor, or material supplier if they meet these requirements here. And we did list those out up here for additional reference because not every project, of course, needs to fill out the con form section. So jumping back to the EXP form, we'll kind of do a little deep dive on that and explain these different areas of the form here. So you can see up top, it's asking for some kind of project-specific information like the log number, applicant name, project address, the name of the CPA, if there is an NPA project associated with this as well, for the same, project address, you would put the log number there for that one. This payer box right here, I'll get to in just a moment when I cover this column here. And then this accrued developer fee box lets you choose these different options here as well. So jumping over here, you'll see there is a button that you can press for NPA columns. And so when you do press that, there's going to be specific columns that come up that are for the qualified, expenses for just the NPA, or the non-qualified expenses for just the NPA stuff. And you also see there's some totals up there. These all auto-calculate, and it lists the, QRE amount and the total credit amount there as well. So there's no need to mess with any of this stuff up here. It's all going to auto-calculate, and these, couple cells right here, they're just related to the NPA section. So when you hide that again, those two whole columns disappear there. So again, jumping over here, you'll notice, again, the totals section up here. A lot of this is going to be updated by DED staff during their review. So really the kind of main thing is going to be the total requested here. For example, I put 1,000 in there. You'll see that it updates a few of those. So, we'll be kind of using this for our credit issuance calculations and stuff like that. So really, for applicant or CPA use, it's kind of more so just for this total requested line up here, so you can see the total amount between the EXP form and con form, because it does add both totals together. and you'll also see the credit amount as well associated with that. So with that being said, again, on this form, all the totals are going to pull up here automatically. So there is a note here to not relist the category subtotals below. So for example, if there's accounting on here and you do, 5 of them, and then you wouldn't have to put the subtotal of these down here on the form. It will all automatically calculate by itself up here. So if anything, that would kind of throw off the calculations. So there is kind of a reminder right there to not do that. And then above the column headings, if you kind of hover over each one of those, we did put some kind of helpful tips for you guys on filling this out. So if there are any questions about, what needs to go into these different fields, there's some kind of helpful stuff there too. So the first kind of column you'll notice on the actual form itself is the category of work. So that really hasn't changed very much from the original form, but we did add data validation. So there is a drop-down box on there to where you can select the different categories of work. So that should hopefully make it a little bit easier to just kind of come through and select the appropriate categories. And it is important to note too that you can, instead of coming down and selecting tuck pointing 500 times, you could copy and paste this down for how many rows that you need. And that's going to get you, what you want to do for those different categories. And then this cost type column right here, don't have to really worry about that at all from your perspective, but for our reviews, this does list the cost type automatically, which is either a soft cost or hard cost. And the reason for distinguishing those on the form, and the reason we're kind of having that calculation, the form calculate that automatically, is just so we can apply, so we can really relate that to this column, which is the incurrence date column. And I'll explain that here in just a moment, but it's basically for the rules of when expenses can be incurred, because there are some differences between the soft and hard costs as far as when they're allowed to incur for an HTC project. Moving on here to the next column, so you'll see there's a related party, also known as IOI column, and that's really only used to identify if one of these vendors is a related party, and definitely refer to the program guidelines for the definition of that as well. But basically, we have this drop-down selection to where it only lets you select yes. And if you do select yes, that's going to indicate that that particular line item, that vendor, is a related party to the applicant entity. Otherwise, if it's blank, we didn't want to make you guys have to come through here and put no on every single one of them. So if it is blank, we're just assuming that the answer is a no for that one. And kind of the same thing for the general contractor change order column. So this one, again, only gives you the option of yes, but it's used to identify if one of these line item expenses is related to a change order on the project. And moving on, so the invoice slash receipt date, that column is basically used to capture the incurrence date of the expenses. You'll notice if you look over here, there's no payment date column anymore, nor are there any, method of payment, check number, all those sort of columns that were used to identify the payment details. And the reason being for that is we did get rid of the DED process, the proof of payment process. So we will no longer be kind of going back in and duplicating some of the CPA's work and kind of double checking that stuff, because we are, trying to reduce some waste in the process. And we determined that that was definitely a duplicative process. And so that's why you'll notice that those details aren't on there anymore. With that said, the one thing that we still will be checking on here is the incurrence date, just to make sure it lines up with the what's allowed in the program guidelines. So this would be the invoice date or the receipt date of the expense here. And then moving on to column F. So you do have the same kind of payee slash contractor name column here. That really hasn't changed too much. Then over here, the description of expense. This one really hasn't changed a whole lot either, but we are definitely trying to get a lot more detail on these descriptions. The reason being, of course, as I mentioned, we're no longer, requesting or requiring or even actually accepting the proofs of payment documentation, such as the credit card statements, bank statements, invoices, all that sort of stuff. So we won't actually have that to reference. So it's very, very imperative that these descriptions are very detailed, because this is what we base our eligibility for our review on to determine what's QRE or non-QRE. So we really want to avoid, any potential questions that may come up, because we want to reduce that back and forth and get you guys your credits faster, if at all possible. So really on here, just having very good detailed descriptions of the expenses is definitely a plus. And the same thing with the non-qualified portions of any expense. So for example, if this one was split, 1,000 qualified, 1,000 non, we just would want to know in the description which items or services over here relate to the $1,000 that's non-qualified. So moving on to the next one. So this one is just the total, so it auto-calculates, so no need to update anything there. So total non-qualified and qualified. Then your qualified expenditures, your non-qualified, again, kind of refer to the QRE examples tab over there, and ask us any questions if you have any about some kind of more specific project related stuff, and we'll be glad to get you an answer to determine which one of these columns that would go in. And then lastly, over here, so this third-party payer name, if applicable, column, you'll notice we've got payer up here. So this column over here is really just intended to note anybody paying for expenses that's not the applicant entity. So really, if there is anybody, any third party that's paying for expenses, technically only the applicant entity per the guidelines is allowed to incur and pay expenses. So if there is anything listed over here, that's kind of a flag for you guys and for us to make sure that that particular line item is moved over to non-qualified. And here, this one's, pretty basic. Like it just says, please list the payer of expenses here, and please note any third-party payers in column M, which was over here. So this should theoretically be the applicant entity. And, the one exception being a single member LLC with that single member paying for expenses. That would be the only exception there. And again, definitely refer to the guidelines on that to read a little bit more about that. And, feel free to reach out to us. And if there is some kind of more specific payment structure or anything going on, and we'd be happy to give you more details on that too. So scrolling down a little bit, we'll go all the way down here. So you'll see there's 2,000 rows. If there are more rows that end up being needed, you can definitely add some more in by just kind of highlighting right here, click insert. You may need to drag a couple of these formulas just down just a touch to make sure that they still doing that. So the one kind of note with doing that, if you're adding anything, make sure to add it not below the last line, because otherwise your totals may not be included up here. So for example, if I type in 1,000 there, you can see it didn't actually add that to the original 1,000 I had at the very top there. So make sure if you're adding rows, you just do it within the existing ones there. So that's kind of it for the EXP form. So we will jump over to the Conform tab now. And as I mentioned, the Conform tab isn't necessary for every single project. So that's why we added some kind of notes here for who actually needs to do the Conform. And, probably most often it's going to be a related party general contractor, but there are some specific instances where subcontractors, equipment lessors, and material suppliers, if they meet these criteria here, that they need to also do a subconform. And also, if there are multiple of these, like say there was a related party general contractor and there was also a subcontractor or multiple subcontractors that met this, you can put the totals and stuff down below for each. Just make sure to kind of separate them on there. So maybe do the related party contractor first and then leave a couple lines and then start with the subcontractors. And maybe, even put a note over here that says this starts the subcontractor line or something like that to note that for us. And then, but otherwise we want you to use the same one to make it a little bit easier. And that way all the totals will pull up here together. And again, the totals will pull up here together as well. So this one, again, we've got the NPA related columns. It'll pop those open. And the same thing with the total section up there. So we'll hide that for now. And So, it's asking for the related party contractor name, the project address, and then the payer. Of course, the payer, in this instance should be the related party contractor. If there were multiple ones, definitely just list, say there were subcontractors that, you were also filling out the conform for, you can put just both names up there as well to make it easier. And then, again, a note here about do not list the category subtotals below, because that'll throw off the totals for the whole thing. So make sure not to subtotal those different categories of work here. You've got the same column for categories of work, same with cost type and all this sort of stuff, pretty much the same as the EXP form. Again, detailed descriptions are essential on this to reduce, any potential back and forth and increase processing time for you guys to get your credits a little bit sooner. And so, same sort of deal here. Third-party payer name, if anybody is paying, for this besides the related party general contractor, again, that would be moved to non-qualified here. Assuming that's the only one that was doing the, conform stuff here. If there are multiples, it would be anybody not paying for items that is not the contractor or one of these, subcontractors that's filling out the form as well. So you've got kind of, just a quick identifier, quick red flag thing there for noting that as well. And you'll see again, it goes down quite a few rows to about 2,000. So if you need to add stuff, do the same process that I showed you kind of on the EXP form. And so basically you've kind of got the instructions tab, the examples of the qualified expenses, the applicant expenses, and then if applicable for the particular project, you do have the conform on here as well. And again, the totals for both of these will add up here automatically, so no need to do any sort of, conform line on here or anything like that. So that's kind of the basics for this form.